Welcome to the Be the Change podcast with your host, Ralph Harper. On this podcast, he shares his vision for the future of the United States. Think of this podcast as somewhat of a roadmap to times in the future on a continuum from a dark past to the 2060s. Yep, that's right. He's a forward thinker whose purpose is to dictate positive outcomes for our children and our country versus leaving it all to chance. Ralph will cover parenting, fatherhood, accountability, and what it takes to win in this great nation. It's not just Ralph. He will have difficult conversations with other thought leaders of different backgrounds and political affiliations. It's time to get started. Here's your host, Ralph Harper.
People often ask, what would Jesus do? And for the last several years, I've been asking the question, what would Martin do? What would Martin Luther King do? I ask that question because I know that Martin Luther King literally gave his life for the rights of Black American people in the United States to vote and to have civil rights. And he did that for the purpose of making a valiant effort to bring the United States closer to the values that our forefathers intended for our country. So Martin Luther King's dream was not just about Black American people. Martin Luther King's dream was about the future of the United States of America. Martin Luther King literally died fighting for those values that he so believed in. And I've been thinking about this question of what Martin would do lately because I just think that had he not been assassinated, we would be as a country in a completely different place than the place we're in today. I believe that because of his tenacity and because of his steadfast approach to making something happen, his courage, his will to do something, and to persist at what he was doing until he got what he felt he needed or what he felt he wanted. Martin Luther King was a powerful man. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been commemorating Martin Luther King because of the fact that we're in that season again where it's his birthday. And it's Martin Luther King Day, which was last week on Monday. And we honor him. But the true honor that Martin Luther King deserves is the honor of the fulfillment of his dream. And because he's not here to fulfill that dream, I believe personally that we, particularly Black American people and the entire citizenry of the United States, have an accountability to fulfill Dr. Martin Luther King's dream. I know it's a bold statement I'm making when I say all of the United States of America has that accountability, because I know that there are large factions of citizens of the United States who just don't believe in Martin Luther King. They don't believe in the America that Martin Luther King believed in. They don't believe in his values, and quite honestly, they, in some cases, just don't believe in the values that our forefathers put forward for the United States of America. That's just the place we're in. That's just the country that is the United States of America. But something has to change. Something has to change because I think Martin Luther King's dream is the right one. Dr. Martin Luther King talked a lot about just the notion that we shall overcome. I still struggle with trying to just figure out exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King meant when he said, we shall overcome. I don't think there's any footage or any documentation that tells us exactly what it meant to overcome. What was that thing that we should have been focused on overcoming? I can speculate because I really believe, just from my perspective, that because Black American people and white American people have been impacted in some ways by the ills of slavery and some of those horrible and egregious things that happened over 150 years ago have been passed down from generation to generation to this place that we live in today. I believe that Dr. King was talking about the notion that we need to overcome those ills so that we can move on and become the country that, again, our forefathers intended. We still have plenty of work to do. Dr. King gave his life for the United States of America, and especially for Black American people in the United States. It is my opinion that for the last 50 years, since Martin Luther King was assassinated, there has been this very severe case of capitulation in terms of people just giving up on Martin Luther King's dream. I am not standing here today to be accusatory. I'm not pointing fingers at those leaders in our community who do what they do to fight against discrimination and racism and police brutality. I'm more concerned about the other stuff, the soft stuff, and particularly the soft skills that need to be built and sustained within people, within individuals, and particularly our children. We own that accountability, and I believe that that is exactly what Martin Luther King would have been talking about. Those are the things that he would have been touting as he moved forward after achieving voting rights and civil rights. The next step would have been, hey, listen, you know what? We have cleared these other hurdles. We have cleared these obstacles, and now it's time for you to do your part. Everything else has been cleared. The path has been paved and cleared, and now it's time for you to do your part. I am quite sure that Martin Luther King would have been talking to us about our personal and individual accountability to be best in class so that we can compete with the rest of citizenry of the United States of America. There's a speech that Martin Luther King spoke at a small church. I can't even remember the town where he gave the speech. But it was a speech that I believe was clearly about Black American accountability. Martin Luther King gave this speech, and it was such a powerful thing that he talked about that it resonated with me in a big way. Martin Luther King said, "I've come here today to plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. Nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnsonian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, then he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-asserted manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. Don't let anybody take your manhood." Those words are powerful. Those words are powerful because it is not talking about any tangible thing that needed to be cleared away in order for Black American people to be successful in the United States of America. When Dr. King talks about an individual's innermost soul and their spirit, he's talking about something that is intangible, that has to do with a person's will to be accountable for him or herself. That, I believe, is the piece that's missing. That is the piece that needs to be resolved. The part that has to do with individuals being accountable for themselves and especially for children within their realm. I cannot fully express in words the importance of this particular notion, this particular agenda that I believe Martin Luther King would have driven had he not been assassinated. I often struggle to communicate in words the value of Martin Luther King in terms of what this next phase would have been for him. It is profound. And for the last several years, this has been very heavy on my mind. So much so that I decided to write a manuscript about what we need to be doing with our kids to ensure they reach the 2060s with enhanced life outcomes. This was important to me because I just know that there's this gap, and as long as we continue to live our lives and wait and count on things happening by chance, we will continue to experience the same life outcomes. There needs to be something done differently. There needs to be something structured. There needs to be a plan that everybody is on board with. We have missed this opportunity for far too long, and now is the time. Now is the time to get it right. And I will share with you what I believe Dr. King would have been driving had he not been assassinated. This is a big deal. In the previous podcast, I touted notions about hope and the value of hope. I talked about how I believe hope is very powerful because hope, to me, serves as the basis for accountability. For instance, I mentioned last week that when you're hopeful about something, it means that you believe in the possibilities of things. Conversely, when you don't believe that things are possible, then that experience does not force you into being accountable or doing something to make it happen. For instance, if you don't believe that you can be successful as a quarterback in the NFL, then there's a good chance you're not going to waste your time trying to be in the NFL. However, when you are hopeful and you believe in that possibility, then there's a good chance that you will go out and be accountable and do the things that would be necessary for you to be successful as a quarterback in the NFL, for instance. So again, hope is the foundation for someone being accountable for something. And it becomes a question of what are individuals willing to do in the United States of America to be successful, especially now that you don't necessarily have those headwinds that prevented you from progressing as fast as other citizens of the United States. Yes, we have discrimination still, but it's nothing like it used to be in the 60s. We have racism, but it's diminished to a place where it's not as fierce as it was, again, in the 60s and before then. We have the right to vote. We are closer to being equal, but we're not quite there yet. I think the equalizer will be when individuals in the United States of America, especially Black American children, make with their parents very conscious decisions that they will be best in class. Being best in class is the epitome of the equalizer. Trust me on this one. Again, we have a lot of work to do, but I want to be clear about what it takes to be successful in this country. Therefore, I have come up with what I call my WIN model. And the WIN model basically lays out a very structured approach to being successful in the United States of America. This is a values-based model that has to do with intrinsic values primarily, but it appears to me to be one of those things that we've always known. We know what it takes, but no one ever lays it out clearly to, some folks do, and I don't know if they use the same life principles that I've decided to consolidate as a program. But It's one of those things where if someone had given you these answers years ago, there's a really good chance your life outcomes would have turned out differently. If someone had told me earlier in my life exactly what it takes to be successful in the United States of America, then my life, in spite of my successes, would have been far better than they are today, had I just known. So that's why I'm on this mission to ensure that as many children as I can reach, or as many children as I can cause other people to reach as well, get this message and start comporting themselves in ways that make it possible for them to be very successful in the United States of America. The WIN model has 3 components. The W in WIN stands for workforce development. The I in WIN stands for integrity. The N in WIN stands for the next generation. Workforce development. Think about this. There's a good chance more than 90% of the children in the United States, in this country, and possibly in other countries around the world, are asked a single question when they are a child. That question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oftentimes, kids will answer this question, but they don't answer the question with any level of seriousness. They will answer it based on some random, they may see a fire truck driving by the street and say, hey, listen, I want to be a fireman. But imagine this. What if we were more serious about asking the question about children and then having a fundamental expectation that they will answer the question in a very serious way? That could be a game changer, because once you get a serious answer to a question like that, then you have a chance to do something towards that goal. So, like the analogy I used earlier, if someone wants to be in the NBA, then there are certain things that they have to do in terms of being developed for the NBA. That's what workforce development is. Developing yourself for a particular job in our country's workforce. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. And I have come up with 3 life principles that are associated with the idea of a person being developed for the workforce. They include, first, reading. My opinion is this: regardless of whether a child knows exactly what they want to do as a career or what job they want to have in the workforce, our kids have to start reading at an early age. And I think, quite honestly, any parent who's not teaching their child to read by the age of 3 is being remiss. They're falling short of their accountability to develop their child. Our kids need to be reading on a regular basis. They need to be reading early in their lives, and they need to read for the rest of their lives. The next life principle underneath the workforce development model is education. We have to make sure that our kids are making their education their absolute number 1 priority. Being educated does not necessarily mean that every child in the country has to go and make sure that they get a bachelor's degree and then go next to make sure that they get an MBA, or next they have to go and get their doctorate degree. Education has a broad scope. There's a wide breadth of opportunities in terms of education, because at the end of the day, the person who decides to become an electrician, all they have to do is be certified as an electrician. The person who decides to be a plumber, all they have to do is go and be certified as a plumber to do plumbing work. Otherwise, the person who decides that they want to mow lawns and and become a landscaper, all they have to do is learn to master that particular skill, and they can become a millionaire doing that as well. But just keep in mind that education is very key in terms of being developed for the workforce, because the jobs in the workforce are broad. It's as broad as doing that hard labor in terms of being that landscaper, to someone who sits at a desk on Wall Street and presses a few keys on the keyboard and make $1 million in a couple of minutes or so. So the reality is, your education is what determines, quite honestly, how hard you work. Unfortunately, that is our reality, especially in the United States of America. But the next life principle that is connected to workforce development is simply that you have to work. Unless you are born into wealth and you are just affluent because your parents turn out to be that way, you will have to develop certain skills so that you can start working. I suggest kids should be working as early as possible. And I think our parents owe it to themselves and to their children to teach their children the value of working early in their lives. This is very important. We can't keep giving our kids everything they want and not having them appreciate the value of working for things, or working for certain things that they want. Because when you do that, you're not helping that child appreciate the value of simply being developed for the workforce. People are developed for the workforce for a purpose, and that purpose is to make money and to use that money for the purpose of living in the United States or living and existing in any culture. Integrity. Integrity has two life principles. The first one is accountability. We've talked about accountability a lot, but I want to put accountability into context in terms of what it means for you to be able to leverage your accountability to continue existing in our culture. Most of you know that I talk about this a lot, and I talk about the fact that in this country, our penal system, our judicial system is one of the worst in the world. And I think I may have given these statistics before, but the United States of America represents 5% of the world population. The United States of America incarcerates 25% of the people incarcerated around the world. Think about that. Our country represents 5% of the world population, and we incarcerate 25% of the people incarcerated in the world. The reason I make this point is that we need to let our kids know that they need to be accountable for the choices they make. And they need to be accountable for the choices they make, because they could make the wrong choice in our country and they will not be available to work or to do anything else, because they will be locked up for most of their lives. And our system is set up in a way where even if you've done your time, when you're free, if you, for whatever reason, fall short of the requirements that are placed upon you once you are allowed to go free for some temporary time period, it is very easy for you to be locked up again. Therefore, accountability is very important. Accountability just doesn't have to do with our penal system. Accountability has to do with you being accountable for every single choice you make. When you make a choice to do drugs, when you make a choice to drink, when you make a choice to do anything, and you have to be accountable for that choice. And sometimes being accountable may mean that you could end up in jail, or you could end up dead. The next life principle under the integrity bucket is respect. Our kids need to appreciate the value of just being respectful to themselves, and especially respectful to others within their realm, respectful to adults versus their friends and their cronies. You can't treat your parents the same way you might treat your friends. Being respectful is a big deal, and it's a big deal because you don't get to judge your own level of integrity. Integrity is usually measured by other people based on your values and based on your way of comporting yourself, what you do in public. If you decide to wear your pants hanging halfway off your butt, then people are going to look at you and treat you as if you are wearing your pants hanging off your butt. If you make a conscious choice that you're going to use the N-word on a regular basis as part of your lingo or whatever you might want to call it, then people are going to treat you with a different level of respect. And they will start to question your integrity. And the last thing I believe any individual in this country needs is to have their integrity questioned. Any person, any man, any child with questionable integrity in the United States of America will find it challenging in terms of what it takes for you to achieve your goals. That is important because relationships in our countries matters more than most of us think. So it's important that every child is cognizant of the fact that people are watching them. People are measuring their level of integrity. They're placing labels on you. And that matters. That counts for something. The N in the WIN model has 2 life principles. The first is duty, or the notion of doing something for other people. The second is saving money and being financially astute. The idea of duty, doing something for other people, is critical. Can you imagine the child, the teenager, who's 15 years old, going to the 5-year-old kid who just happens to be within his realm, and he asked that child, have you read today? Have you read at least 5 pages in a book today? Because if you haven't, you need to go back and do that before you play that game all night. That is one of the most powerful things that could happen. That's one of the most powerful interactions that could happen. But it's much bigger than that, because parents also have a huge accountability when it comes to making sure that their children really appreciate and understand the value of the notion of helping other people. And it's not just to help the smaller kids, it's also just to have a child who's 5 years old goes to a soup kitchen to help elderly people or to help feed the homeless. I tell you, that is something that when I witness that and when I see it, it's such a powerful thing. And I talk about this young man all the time, but there's a guy that I mentor. His name is Jackson Turner. He is such an amazing kid because he raises money. He raises a lot of money, actually, to help people at his school and other schools who otherwise can't afford to purchase school supplies. He raises thousands of dollars each year. And then he also raises money to buy Christmas gifts for kids who can't otherwise afford them, or whose parents can't afford to buy them Christmas gifts. This kid is the epitome of what I'm talking about. There are other kids like that. There are thousands of them around the world. But he is the one who's within my realm that I see doing it on a daily basis, and I have so much respect for Jackson. He's my protege. He's my friend. His parents and I, we're close, and just to see him operate is profound. He is, quite honestly, the exception. But I don't want my point to be lost. We need to breed other kids who are ready, able, and willing to take on that monumental task of supporting people who are disadvantaged in our country. that is the kind of thing that will set you aside from the average person in our country. And it's a critical thing. The idea of helping someone and supporting the next generation so that we create this cyclical process of doing all of these things, all the stuff that I've talked about. We have a duty, we have an obligation to make sure that our kids are reading. We have an obligation to make sure that our kids understand and appreciate education. We have an obligation to make sure that our kids understand the value of working and being accountable and respectful. And we have a duty to teach our kids those values. The next life principle under Next Generation is the idea of saving money and being financially astute. This is critical because when you save money, it's not just to spend money and go and buy elaborate things or even to buy things that you really can't afford. Saving money and being financially astute is important because when you have money, it's not just to have money to support yourself. Saving money makes it actually easier for you to support other people. Whether it's being able to travel to support someone, whether it's being able to give the homeless person $5 to buy them a meal for the day, or whether it's being able to do what Jackson does. Jackson raises a lot of money, but it's being able to buy a school supply for kids at your school who just can't afford it. Saving money, it is a foundation for building wealth. People don't save money to use it today. People save money for the future. And I can tell you one good example of why people need to be smarter about saving money is we experienced an exceptional reality over the last 35 to 40 days. Our president was involved in shutting our government down and putting 800,000 people at risk. They were at risk because their bi-weekly paychecks were stopped. Many of them were forced to work anyway, but they weren't getting paid. Consequently, those folks who didn't have any savings in any account, they were impacted more severely than those folks who had savings accounts with thousands of dollars in it. Yeah, they had to dip into their savings, which most people just don't like to do. But when such a crisis just appears out of nowhere and you have that safety net built up because you've been saving for most of your life, then it prevents you, it mitigates any chance of you having the same kind of experience as that person who just doesn't have access to any funds at all. And some of these folks, quite honestly, from their perspectives, were reduced to a place where they had to ask their family members for money and support. Some of them were reduced to having to go to food pantries to get food. Many of these U.S. citizens had no choice but to go to food pantries to have a meal. Many of them were put in situations where they could not afford their medication. And in some ways that put their lives at risk. All of these things could have been prevented. Nonetheless, this is the country we live in. I make this point, and I think it's not my intent to be partisan on this at all. I'm making a point that this is a predicament that was caused by the United States government that put a particular group of people, a particular group of citizens of the United States in a predicament where they were, in many cases, forced to work, but they weren't getting paid. And they could not afford to sustain their normal way of living in our country, in many cases because they just did not have the means and they did not have the savings put away to be used for predicaments like this or And that situation it just turned out to be really bad for a lot of people when you consider the fact that over 800,000 people were impacted. Yeah, there's a pretty large percentage of those folks who did not have enough savings in their accounts to make it work. Not that I'm suggesting that anyone should be saving for a situation like that, because this is a situation, quite honestly, from my perspective, that never should have happened, but it did. And the impact could have been lighter had more people had savings in their accounts. But that's just how it happened. And again, I'm not blaming anyone for not having it. I'm just suggesting as part of my model that saving money is a smart thing to do, not just for those exceptional times when certain events happen that may cause you to have to dip into your savings to make things work, but also saving money has to do with just being, again, building wealth and building it in a way where you can afford to pay for college for your children as you get older so they can go to college as well, and other things in life that just happen to support your elderly parents, whatever the case may be. So just wanted to make that point about the idea of saving money. So I give you these 7 life principles. And by the way, if you haven't realized it yet, I just gave you these 7 life principles. They are, again, I'll just recap. They are reading, education, work, accountability, respect, duty in terms of doing for other people, and saving money. Those 7 life principles spell the word rewards. Those are what I call our rewards life principles that need to be instilled in our kids starting at 3 years old. And I believe that by instilling these life principles in our children, it will better prepare them to be successful in the United States of America. I point this out because it's my firm belief that had Martin Luther King lived, something like this would have been his agenda. It may have been better than what I've come up with. I really believe that I've come up with the right values that need to be instilled in our kids. I believe I've come up with the right structure and the plan to work with school systems around the country and to work with parents around the country to get them on board with this notion that these 7 life principles need to be instilled in our children. I believe I'm right that once we do that, we will have millions of kids going forward who will carry this and perpetuate these values throughout generations. And these children today who happen to be 3 years old, by the time they reach the end of the 2060s, 50 years from now, they will be in their 50s and they will be older. And at the end of the day, their children and their children's children will have been impacted by these values. And I believe that would have been Martin Luther King's mission. So when I think of Martin Luther King and I think of his dream, I think that this is one of those things. It may be a segment of what he was thinking. I'm not sure. But I believe that this is definitely a value system that Martin Luther King would have been touting. He definitely would have been telling citizens of the United States of America about their accountability, because he started to do that before he was assassinated. And this is, I believe, that part of the equation that has been missing. And I will say this again. Again, I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone, but I think our culture has capitulated for the last 50 years since Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I think we need to get back on track with a structured plan to have Martin Luther King's dream come to fruition. We have 50 years, folks. Please help us out.
Thank you for joining us on Be the Change. Be sure to subscribe today and don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to bring you the best conversations. Visit ralphharper.com for show notes, resources, and events. To support Be the Change, please join our patron community at patreon.com/Ralph Harper. Be the Change returns the same time next week and is brought to you by the 2060s Project.